Hey, we're live. Hey,
Yay!
it's Friday. Who knows? In the time since in the last hour, there may have been 75 more things that have happened in the ecosystem that we got to talk about. This is the Friday Q&A stream, the CUI Hotline. That's where we are right now. You can find us streaming on LinkedIn, on YouTube. You can go to cuihotline.org and fill out the form and submit a question there. You call the number and leave a question. We promise we will get to your question if it is queued up, but holy crap.
We got a lot. We got a lot going on, guys.
This is the busiest 35 day period in terms of just general number of events in a long time. And it's by far the busiest summer that I can ever remember in the broader CMMC and adjacent stuff ecosystem for sure. I'm getting people sending me blog drafts internally, and I'm like, I forgot this event even happened. So,
this even happened? What?
Man, so lots to talk about, lots of questions to get to, tons of stuff. Thanks for joining us. We'll try to remember all of it, and if we miss it, then we'll add it to the queue for next week. Daniel, here we are again, flying the plane.
Here we are.
And your thought of the week: the path to false claims is paved with false starts.
Yeah, so the big thing that I am seeing more recently is small, medium-sized businesses that are using external service providers like MSPs and MSPs are just taking a SPUR score that their MSP gave them and putting it in their system in SPRS without any real validation or checking. There's a level of trust there. The problem is whoever the senior official is in the organization that's submitting that SPUR score that the MSP is giving you is on the hook stating that the company is this compliant, right? Are you this compliant or are you this compliant? You know, so forth and so on. The problem is if you're submitting that score saying that your company is that, and DOJ or DIBCAT comes to assess you and then turns you over to the DOJ, or whistleblower comes out and saying, yeah, you're actually not that compliant. You've actually kind of signed the deal, right? That you've stated it, that you're that compliant, even if your MSP is the one that gave you the score. So I'm hoping a couple things. One, do due diligence and check the math of the MSP before you submit an SPRS score. And number two, make sure that you have really strong contractual and legal tie-ins in case the number that they're giving you is inaccurate and you have some kind of source to fall back on. I am not a lawyer. I don't even know how that would work. But you cannot blindly trust your cyber score representing your company to the DOD and not be on the hook at some point, which we're going to talk about being on the hook a few times, I think, today, Jacob. But that was the first kind of real new thing that I'm seeing a trend of, kind of blindly posting SPUR scores that their MSPs have given them. You just can't do it. You cannot put yourself at that level of corporate risk. You just don't do it. Hard stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for those of you that aren't aware, we coined this term false start quite a while ago in the content that we put out. And that refers to the process of when you sign up for a CMMC assessment and you hire a C3PAO, there are phases to a CMMC assessment. There's 4 phases. The first phase basically just involves them, if you pass the smell test on your readiness for an assessment. You have to actually represent some sort of readiness to go through the assessment. And if you don't qualify to go through the actual assessment itself. Now, that doesn't go down as an assessment failure. It doesn't go down as anything at all. The AB, the DOD, they do not monitor this metric. I really wish that they did, because most companies, once they have demonstrated readiness for assessment, tend to pass their level 2 assessments. We can see this with the most recent data from the AB town hall on Tuesday. There's 269 CMMC level 2 certified companies right now, and there's 8 failures. There are far more companies that have not qualified, that have gotten a false start in phase 1, but we don't know how many that is. Now, like you've said, Daniel, what we saw at first was the queue for assessments went through the roof. Starting in December, January, when the 32 CFR rule went into effect, because everyone was signing up, and everyone, oh my God, there's not enough assessment capacity. And as it turns out now, a lot of C3POs are saying we can get you started in a couple weeks, because so many of those people just got churned through and didn't qualify for an assessment. They told them to come back later when they were ready. I really wish the DoD and the AB tracked this number, because I think it would be the thing that would tell people you're probably not as ready as you think, because I don't know, 60%, 80%, I don't know what the number would be, of companies that sign up don't even qualify for an assessment.
I mean, that's what my gut says. I think it is that high. Like, I mean, we know assessors, to someone's comment here in the chat, we know assessors that can start within a few weeks, right? Depending on the size of the C3PO, some are smaller shops, some are larger. But because they have so many false starts, like a lot of them using MSPs that said that they were ready, and MSPs get into it. And when they're asked to show their SRM or SSP at the company level, they can't disclose that. They don't have the documentation to show the assessor. So the assessor can't start past phase one. So again, we're seeing this kind of rinse and repeat behavior over and over again. I think, to your point, Jacob, I think we're probably only seeing 10 to 20% of the pass fail rate. And I think the rest of the 80-ish% are not even through phase one.
Yeah, and this gets back to the point where you were saying, where everyone has been making these attestations to the government that we're compliant, and they've been uploading scores, which are an official statement to the government that said, we're good to go. And the government comes along and said, okay, we're just going to double check via this assessment. And then a bunch of people don't even qualify to make it through. And then you can just throw a dart at the false start and be like, hey, what's going on here? You've told us you're good. The C3PAO said you can't even represent the ability to begin an assessment. So how exactly did you come up with this score that says you're a 100 or a 110 or whatever? So yeah, not a good situation.
Sometimes, that's a problem.
yeah, not a good situation for sure. Okay, a rare double thought of the week here. Okay, so if you want a glimpse of the future of what it will be like to find out that CMMC is now the new normal, look no further than the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers official notice on sam.gov. InfoSec alert, all capital letters, notice to the Defense Industrial Base, blah, 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 blah. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is awaiting issuance of the final DFARS clause prior to fully implementing the CMMC program, which establishes requirements for defense contractors, blah, blah, blah. This is all the descriptions of the programs and so on and so forth, provides a consistent methodology, it balances interests, it creates blah, 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 blah. Preliminary guidance indicates that October 1st, 2025 will be the go-live date for the CMMC 2.0 program. That date is still pending, as we talked about beforehand. However, once final, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers solicitations will specify the level of certification required for performance under the contract. If you have any questions, please direct any of them to the contracting officer and the contract specialist on the sam.gov publication announcement. So originally, they came out last week and they said October 1st is the go live date for CMMC, as we've talked about. That is the end of the CMMC 1.0 rollout, which is an artifact left over in the Code of Federal Regulations right now. That will be updated once the final rule goes final. Could that be October 1st? Sure. It's probably not going to be October 1st just because of how long the red tape takes to get through. So I posted about this on LinkedIn and tagged the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they went in and updated the sam.gov notice, which was kind of cool. So they're paying very close attention to what's going on. Either way, whether it's October 1st, October 31st, this is what it will look like when it goes live. Whatever DoD component is going to put out a notice like this, and it will say, from this point forward, our solicitations will specify a CMMC level that you have to meet to take award of the contract. And if you have any questions, please reach out to the contracting officer. Next.
So, I mean, let's rewind the tape a little bit. In the past 30 days, we've seen Lockheed supply chain blog. Boeing came out with a newsletter to their supply chain that we've seen. The Army Corps saying you should probably do this thing. The SecDef coming out and saying CIO implement CMMC. 48 CFR has made its way to OMB and OIRA. Like, what
and now
What
And
is
now,
happening?
to add on top of that, there's a freaking False Claims Act settlement against a contractor for non-compliance with DFAR 7012. So add that into 7 things. Hey, whoa, six things? We can come up with a 7th.
Yeah.
We can come up with a 7th. Give it to the end of the day and something else is going to happen. But yeah, you got SecDef, Army Corps, you got Boeing, you got Lockheed. Leidos was not that long ago when they put out their guidance as well. Like, Gold Coast is going to be real spicy this year whenever we go down to San Diego, because last year at Gold Coast, Stacy got up in the main hall and people were literally falling asleep while she was talking. So I'll bet it ain't going to be like that this year. Especially, I cannot wait. I cannot wait for Gold Coast. But anyways, so you got this U.S. Army Corps of Engineers notice. Maybe they know that it's October 1st. Maybe they don't. Maybe they jumped the gun. Maybe they're using information that's not public yet. Tomatoes, doesn't matter. That's what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, the Department of Justice announced that they had settled a False Claims Act liability with a small defense contractor. This is a 70-person company, as far as I can tell. It's less than 100 employees based off of everything I can tell about the size of the company. This company had to pay $1.75 million to resolve their liability under the False Claims Act for not complying with their cybersecurity obligations pursuant to DFAR 7012 and all the rest of the clauses for an Air Force contract that they had for several years. The interesting thing here is that this is like millions of dollars less than the other False Claims Act settlements that we've seen. And it turns out they notified the government of their own non-compliance. They wrote to the government and said, hey, we did not do what we were supposed to do pursuant to the terms of this contract. And as a result, they received credit for cooperation and notification and working with the government in the investigation. But you still got to pay $1.75 million because you still got paid for work you didn't do, right? You're just not getting the penalties that go along with it. So by doing that, by blowing the whistle on themselves, if you will, they saved themselves millions in additional penalties for fines. But it's still a 7-figure issue, even when you tell the government that you weren't compliant. Probably one of the most interesting things here is that their private equity investors are named in the settlement because according to the settlement, a private equity employee was advising the contractor and gave access to a third party to help improve their CUI handling environment. And that third party was using employees in Egypt. And those employees did not have the authorization to view and access and deal with that CUI. Whoopsie daisy. Now the private equity firm is included as well. You got to be careful, folks. You got to be careful.
I mean, when we run into the world of holdcos, opcos, PE, a lot of those kind of holding companies will provide a level of shared services, IT, HR, finance services for all of their operating companies. There's an here that Jacob just pointed out. If your shared services across all your operating companies allows non-US person access to export control data, deemed what happened here, isn't able to align with compliant tool sets for CMMC, isn't implementing NIST 800-171 and the tool sets that they have, you're going to fail the assessment because they are in turn basically like an external service provider to you. And the fact that they had probably a majority stake in the organization that ended up getting the fine, like, you can't buy a business and not have the risk that comes with the business. Like, you're going to be roped into this.
Yeah.
And so to all my PE firms out there, all my hold opcos out there, pay very close attention to this, because this is something that a lot of you have not thought about, what it would look like legally if you were brought forth supporting one of your operating companies. This is a blueprint for what you're about to see. And this is best case scenario.
This is them notifying the government, hey, we goofed up.
Yeah.
Imagine if somebody from the contractor was like, this private equity firm guy is giving access to this. I don't know what the heck's going on here. I'm very uncomfortable. We shouldn't be doing this. They get shut down, and then they call up Bruce Judge, and he's like, "Hey, Bruce, I got a hot one for you." And then they go through the Whistleblower Act, and then all of a sudden, this is a $6 million fine instead of 1.75, right? And you just, for the PE firm's perspective, you just nuked your return on the investment.
The valuation just went,
right? Yeah, man. And it's really interesting in here. They're like June 6th to July 29th. It was like a month where they made the one guy made this one decision in like 1 month, and then boom. All of a sudden they're included on this deal as well. So it's fascinating. It's a settlement. Doesn't technically mean they, it doesn't impose guilt or liability or whatever. But we all know how settlements work. We all know how they work. But this just happened. This just came out. Check it out. Let us know what you think. I tagged I tagged like 1 billion lawyers in the comments on LinkedIn. So hopefully
tell us what this means.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to get their perspective. But I think that PE firm getting implicated there is particularly interesting. So
very much so.
All righty, let's see here. Okay, we talked about this one last time. I think we had a comment on the YouTube video where somebody asked for clarification on this question that we talked about last week, if I recall correctly. So this was a question that came through. They were saying they were using Unify level 2, level 3 switches, Fortinet firewall. Those network devices don't use FIPS validated algorithms. And the cloud management platform for those network devices is not itself FedRAMP. Can you still use them? And I believe that there was a question, if I can find it.
I think they maybe mentioned that the Fortinet, that model didn't have a FIPS validated module. Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe we can go back and check to see, maybe rehash your answer here real quick.
Yeah,
let me see if I can find it.
Two quick answers. On the perimeter, you'll want something that's FIPS 140-2 validated cryptography. You got to have it, hard stop. Internally, for switches and wireless access points, you can use physical protections to make sure that you're protecting the confidentiality of CUI, aka over the local network, right? So you don't have to do FIPS as part of that. But things on the perimeter facing external, like a firewall, let's make sure to put FIPS in place, right? So find a model that does support that. For the management plane of this, a lot of networking tools have cloud interfaces for configuration management. That is going to be security protection data. That does not need to be FedRAMPed unless for some reason that platform is ingesting the network traffic and decrypting the network traffic, right? If CUI is coming into that cloud is in scope for FedRAMP. If it's just a configuration plane and that's it, it would be a security protection asset with security protection data. No FedRAMP needed.
Gotcha. Yeah, this person's question from last week said, I'm a bit confused by the last comment on FIPS. You said compensating controls for internal network hardware are okay, but firewalls had to be FIPS. Then you said that the Fortinet firewall that was in question, which does not support FIPS, was okay. Maybe they misheard, or maybe we misspoke.
Yeah, you have Fortinet has varying models, right? You have to pick one that has FIPS validated cryptography, 140-2. And again, we see this a lot. Marketing is a powerful and dangerous thing in the wrong hands, whether that's talking about FedRAMP and CMMC authorized SaaS apps or FIPS. FIPS compliant and FIPS validated are two different things. Make sure when you are buying something, FIPS 140-2 validated is the secret ingredient there. So but yes, your firewall, your perimeter there, needs to be FIPS validated, hard stop. And hey, if you can find switches and access points, sure, why not? And if you're running an enclave inside of your organization, maybe carving out a room, then there is a case to be made that network equipment would need to be FIPS internal, because you're also doing commercial work and you might not have the same level of protection. So you got to keep that data encrypted. So but I'm assuming the whole building is in scope, the whole kind of population's in scope. Firewall, FIPS, internal, physical compensating.
Gotcha. All righty. Will the 48 CFR CMMC rule change the requirement for CMMC at time of contract award? No, it will not. It is 32 CFR policy that CMMC is a condition of contract award. The 48 CFR rule will not change that. Will CMMC requirements be inserted into existing contracts? Highly likely that will not happen. It would take a massive, massive decision on the DoD to modify an existing contract. Obviously, they retain the right to do that if they want to, but for all intents and purposes, for 99% of people out there, this will be for new solicitations and contracts. Now, be aware that your option period is going to be included in the phased rollout, and so that can be included as well. But if you're like, hot to trot in the middle of an active contract, your option year is not coming up, very unlikely that they're going to call you up and be like, got some news for you. We're changing the terms of the deal.
CMMC's coming in hot.
Yeah. All right, let's see here. Moving along. Has anything changed with the initial phasing that was discussed around the rule? Will self-assessments be present in most contracts for phase 1? Nothing has changed about DoD's plan for the phased rollout. They're still planning on 4 phases for the rollout, which is 1 calendar year each, so 4 total years. However, that doesn't mean that you might not see a level 2 certification requirement for 4 years, because during the first phase of the rollout, they're going to have level 1 in all pertinent contracts and level 2 self-assessment in all pertinent contracts. And then there's a little line in there that says that they have the discretion to use level 2 certification assessments in place of level 2 self-assessments. And so the question then becomes, well, how do they make the decision to use a certification assessment instead of a self-assessment? There was a memo in February that was published that said, if you handle DoD's specific data types underneath that contract, then the minimum requirement is a level 2 certification assessment. And so when you say, okay, that's the guidance to the contract workforce, and there's nothing preventing them from having a level 2 certification requirement in phase 1, then who knows if you're going to get a level 2 self-assessment or a level 2 certification assessment. A lot of people say there won't be any level 2 certification assessments in phase 1. And I don't know how that's true based off of the guidance that we've seen publicly right now. There's no prohibition on them doing it. They have discretion to do it, and there's standing guidance that they must do it. So I would not bet on getting self-assessments. Will there be some? Probably. How many will there be? What will the ratio be? No idea. I just know that based off what I see right now, I would not advise anybody to take that risk unless you know for sure that you are going to get a self-assessment. Because if you're wrong and you do what most people do when you get a self-assessment, then you haven't really dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. You haven't really put yourself through an assessment the way that a third party would. And so you're probably going to be more upside down than you think. Then you're going to have the rush of people trying to schedule assessments. You're probably missing implementation. And then all of a sudden you're going to miss your award window and you're going to be screwed. So if you know for sure from your customer you're getting a self-assessment, congratulations. If you don't know for sure, don't assume. You got to figure it out. And if you can't find out, then you need to hedge your bets here. Otherwise, you are really risking a lot.
And we say it all the time. The DoD's rollout of this is not the same as your prime's rollout of this. So the DoD, unless you're primarily a prime, you actually probably have more breathing room than people downstream of a Lockheed or a Boeing, right? Because they need to enforce and make sure that their supply chain is ready so they know who they can work with if they pursue business, right? So be aware, ask your prime first, what's your rollout plan and what's my timeline to get certified? And then number 2, if you're a prime, to Jacob's point, don't just assume that everything's going to self-attest in phase 1, because the only guidance that we've seen, and this is the only public memo we've seen regarding this in internal to contracting officers, was basically the different levels of the types of CUI, and is there going to be a requirement to certify or not certify? And as far as I know, this memo plus the innate human behavior of CYA paired together is probably going to mean a lot more contracts end up with certification. They would have been better inside of the DoD to say year 1 is only self-attest, no discretion, because that discretion is going to be heavily used, in my opinion, and that's going to imply a lot of heartache and heartburn to a lot of people that weren't ready.
Now, I may or may not have had conversations with people who may or may not be very close to the interpretations of these memos, who may or may not have given statements at conferences saying that the DoD's intent is to have self-assessments in phase 1. And I'm like, listen, that's great, but that's not what your guidance is going to result in. So if you want phase 1 to be self-assessments, you need to modify the guidance that you gave to you may or may not have given to people who may or may not be contracting officers. Just read it. You want it to do a thing and you said a different thing. So if you want this thing, then go with it. If you want other thing, change the way thing is written. And that message, I've been getting the other person is typing dots for quite a while now. So maybe this is like the issue with the class deviation, where we raised hell about the class deviation. We were on LinkedIn, we were pinging people, we were holding up signs outside of the ANS and the Pentagon, being like, you have a problem on your hands, guys. DFAR 7012 says most current version, CMMC says says revision 2. What are we going to do? And then they avoided that problem, and they said, here's a class deviation, just do revision 2 until we tell you otherwise. Easy peasy. This feels very similar, where they're like, we want self-assessments in phase 1. We put out a thing that says no self-assessments in phase 1. So they could just modify the memo. But as of right now, that is not what has happened. So if you're betting on it, just be careful. Just be careful.
Yes.
All righty. Okay. For organizations with multiple locations / remote workforce, what are the best practices for scoping and compliance across distributed environments? Are there any differences in requirements for remote employees?
So data flow is data flow. You've got to do the same level of research and discovery across all the assets and all the orgs. Now, from that, you'll be able to determine, can I back down my compliance boundary to maybe a handful of facilities versus all facilities, right? So that's one thing to be aware of. Remote employees can follow something called an alternate worksite policy, right? So basically the work from home policy. How are you going to basically put in place, the family members and no unauthorized people can see your screen, right? You can't record things. You can't have things like Google, listening in on you, or you have to lock your doors. There's no physical CUI allowed in an alternate work site, right? Pieces of paper or, things like that. You can't print. So make sure that when you're doing that remote piece, you have a very strong policy that what they have to follow. My recommendation, stay as digital as humanly possible. In that, you want to leave assessors thinking they might have to go on site to your home office would not actually be preferred, right? So try and keep it as digital as possible with really strong acceptable use policies around who can actually see the data and who they're permitted to show there. But yeah, try and follow the data flow, try and descope, and then put a good, strong policy set around your remote workers.
Definitely. All righty. We work with the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. Do we need to segment our data / network?
Potentially. So we're seeing a lot of NIST 171 requests unprompted by FAR CUI coming out of the DOE as well. So if it's the same requirement with NIST 171 base level CUI, then you don't necessarily have to segment it. You can keep it the same. If you're dealing with like UNMPI data or nuclear information that requires more and above and beyond 171, or maybe it's different personship, right? It's a US person versus a US citizen, then yes, there could be a play to need to segment that data. But right now, if you're just looking kind of bar to bar, NIST 171 to NIST 171, there's no need, and it would probably be honestly too much of an extra effort just to go ahead and segment that. I would you can keep it flat, keep it in the same environment, control it with access controls on who should be able to access what data. But yeah, there's nothing above and beyond that.
Gotcha. Let's see here. There was a question on Reddit. I'll see if I can find it. But the gist of the question was, is on-prem equipment out of scope if I'm using GCC High?
Yeah. So I had a conversation recently with somebody that only had SharePoint Online as their CUI asset. And I said, in GCC High. And I said, that's interesting. I was like, is the workstation that accesses and syncs that document not a CUI asset? And then we went down the trail of defining and elaborating what a CUI asset was. So the short answer is I've not seen a world where a physical workstation is kept out of scope as being a CUI asset that is attached to GCC High, syncing Outlook, Exchange email down, syncing OneDrive, syncing SharePoint document libraries. My answer to that is likely no.
Yeah, they said, let's see here.
Use the old Reddit, by the way.
Oh yeah, yeah. Don't give me this newfangled new Reddit. OGs remember. I'm gonna pull Werthers out of your ear too. Oh yeah, please sanity check my statement. At my corporate office, my laptop is configured to talk to M365 commercial, but also has a separate VM for GCC High connections, with policies not allowing the two to see each other. Our corporate access point, router, switches, firewall just gets us onto the internet, does not have any policies for securing cloud connections. M365 commercial and GCC High cloud connections are secured at the endpoint and in the cloud, SSL, TLS, BitLocker, etc. Our on-premise equipment does not provide any services to establish or secure these connections. This means our on-premise equipment is out of scope for CMMC. Please check my sanity on this.
I'm going to say yes and no. And the main reason would be the encryption mechanism, at least for security protection assets. So if I'm running a physical workstation and that workstation is my commercially joined device, and then I have a VM that's running another Windows instance that is connected to GCC High. If you're trying to treat it like a VDI, like an out-of-scope asset, is all screen capture disabled? Is redirection disabled, right? With, is all of these things disabled so that it can only emulate a mouse, keyboard, and display. And usually when you're running, VMware locally, or you're running, some sort of virtualization software, you probably at a local level have the ability to control that, but not at a sysadmin level in the sense of pushing it down to your organization. So my major concern would be it's probably not as out of scope as you would think, because the user would have the ability to enable things like redirection, screen capture, and all of that stuff, which would bring your physical laptop then into scope. But if you can disable all that, you're going to be good. The other side is the underlying piece. If your virtual hard disk is encrypted, it's going to use some sort of encryption, likely using the encryption tied in with your TPM chip on your actual device. So you could have some security concerns there with security protection data, security protection assets with the BitLocker key, being able to unlock your workstation and unlock that encrypted VM unless it's separately encrypted to a FIPS standard. So I think you running a Windows 11 virtual desktop locally on your physical desktop is probably not as out of scope as you would like it to be. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
There you go. Well, this reminds me of a very interesting call that we had this week. I think they were looking for services for like 12 people. I mean, they were very, very small, anticipating that they were going to have to deal with these requirements. And they had people spread across a couple locations in the US, as well as a location in Europe. And they were sort of scared off of GCC High due to cost. And so they wanted to talk VDI. And much to their surprise and amazement, we were informing them that in a lot of cases, despite the word on the street out there, the reputation, GCC High would have been cheaper than a VDI for their specific situation. Do you want to maybe talk about how you got to that line of reasoning there?
Yeah, so GCC High is about 30 to 40% more than commercial licensing is today. So an E5 in commercial is about 40% more than a G5 in GCC High. When you're talking 12 people, that's going to be between $10,000 and $15,000 probably, somewhere in that ballpark, maybe closer to 9 to 15, somewhere in there. And so that's the GCC High license. When you look at Azure spend to set up a compliant environment, okay, well, we have the VDI environment itself. Okay, well, we have to have Sentinel. We need to do some sort of security logging. We need to retain those logs. It's Azure Log Analytics. Oh, we have to deny by default, allow by exception network traffic. There's an Azure firewall. Quickly, you start adding up to, $1,000, $2,000 a month in Azure consumption to have a compliant VDI environment that you own. And so you could easily double your run costs. Plus, you need GCC High licenses for the VDI. So when you start looking at that, repurposing your physical workstations as a small business is by far a significantly cheaper solution than leveraging the consumption of Azure cost inside of VDI.
Yeah, it was that was a fun one because they were basically convinced, they had convinced themselves essentially that GCCI was always more expensive in all cases. The one of the most common things that marketing likes to do in general from out in the ecosystem is say GCCI is too expensive as like a given, which is not always the case.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Another question that came up regarding GCC High for one of the calls that we heard this week was they were like, well, we can't use GCC High because we've got foreign nationals that need access to data inside that tenant, so we can't use it, right?
Wrong. GCC High has no restrictions on who you invite to your tenant. Contractually, it's Microsoft has to have US persons on their side. So that's how that works there. We have a lot of international companies that we work with that have non-US persons, and with good purview and good access controls, you can actually have both of those exist. You can have non-US persons as long as you're segmenting away the export control, no foreign mark data in that tenant away from them.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, are there any steps being taken to help small businesses in the inspection process as far as affordability? How long will we have once the final rule comes out? Are there any steps being taken to help small businesses? Okay, if you're asking the DoD and the primes, sure, there's a ton of steps being taken to help small businesses. You can check out Project Spectrum. You can check out the monthly Lockheed Martin Supply Chain Cybersecurity Awareness Academy. You can find stuff and resources around learning and understanding CMMC things. There's tons of stuff that's going on. There's Blue Cyber. There's all this stuff for understanding the requirements. Now, if the actual question you're asking is there any money being appropriated to help these companies, then no. There is no appropriation to help with this. There is no meaningful steps being taken to assist SMBs with the things that they actually need help with beyond getting a cursory understanding of what the requirements are. If you don't have the expertise, if you don't have the skills, if you don't have the funds, if you don't have the resources, those things are not going to be provided for you. There's some stuff on the periphery that we've talked about in the past, like this ENCODE program, which is like you talked about, Daniel. Maybe you can explain. It's a relatively narrow use case depending on what you're going for. And we haven't really heard anything about its development recently. But outside of that, there really isn't anything big going on for a company to deal with this, because as far as the way that this is playing out, CMMC is verifying the thing that you said you already did and that you technically already got paid for. And so the government, by the book, doesn't see it as very big of a problem because your assessment isn't all that expensive and you're just proving the thing that you already said you did. A lot of times people will say, oh, the CMMC inspection is coming up, and so now I need to implement everything. And the government goes, actually, that's why we're coming to inspect and make sure that it's there. So of course we aren't going to pay you for the thing that you already said that you did. As far as how long we have once the final rule comes out, that's TBD. Once the final rule comes out, it will have an effective date attached to it. That could be immediate. That could be 2 weeks. It could be 60 days. We don't know yet. Once the rule goes into effect, from that point, all new DoD solicitations and contracts will have some level of CMMC requirement in them. And in order to take award of that contract, you have to meet that CMMC level. So if a solicitation comes out in February and it says you need a CMMC level 2 certification in order to take award, and they are going to award it in June, then you have to have your level 2 certification, your level 2 C3PAO status by June in order to take award of the contract. So how long you have will depend primarily on the window of time that your customer uses between solicitation and contract award.
So ENCODE, to your point, Jacob, ENCODE is the Army's response to let's help small business do CMMC. It is a virtual desktop environment that you will remote into, and then you will do all of your work inside of there related to the contract. The problem is two things. That does not negate the cost of you having to get CMMC certified and all the other supplemental documentation that you're following. That's number one. Number two, a lot of people don't want to have their business proprietary data that's commingled with their contract data in an environment that the government owns. That's just good business, right? You don't want to be able to have your data out there for the government just to take hold of if they wanted to. And then actually the last one, there's a good third one. There's language in CMMC around significant change. And if you stop using that to something completely different. So then there's another 40 to 80K out the window. You've paid for 2 certs, and then you've had your data locked up for a while inside of a federal enclave that you don't own the rights to, right? The actual environment itself. So there's a lot of concerns around encode. I think it's a good effort, and I know the intent is there, but it's a little problematic on how many people will actually use it or not. So we did a significant change blog. Dan on LinkedIn, and my apologies, Dan, if you're listening, I haven't gotten back to you yet. The PowerPoint slide I have in there is a summary of some of the points in NIST 837. It's not a direct copy and paste the slide piece of it on what examples of significant change are. So, but yeah, it's really important to understand that if you're using a environment that you do not own for your CMMC, and you're switching away from that environment like Encode to a completely different environment that you own now, or that you now own, you're going to trigger some of these new infrastructure, new environment, which would trigger another assessment there. Yeah,
absolutely. All righty, let's see here. Okay, this was a fun one. Okay, so we're going to take the time to read through this because I thought it was very, very helpful. I work for a medium-sized DoD contractor that is the final stage of their CMMC Level 2 journey. Congratulations. We are about to schedule C3PAO audit to start later this year. Wonderful. I am responsible for IT, cybersecurity, and compliance. My condolences. Yeah, I've built the company's IT infrastructure and all of its CMMC compliance, including policies, procedures, risk management, etc. I'm responsible for getting the company through the CMMC audit later this year. God bless you. My company is approving an employee to take his BYOD device with CUI on it outside the country so he can use his mobile device. We don't separate FOUO CUI from our other data. The entire tenant is considered in scope and inside the boundary. The person does have access to CUI, but more importantly, his basic job function involves information that, although it isn't marked, we know should be protected from disclosure. We handle it as if it's CUI. The user doesn't need to carry CUI with him. The company has a virtual desktop environment, but they aren't willing to require the user to use the virtual environment from a computer instead of the convenience of his phone while he's traveling. As I understand it, this is not a risk the company can accept, and is a direct violation of DFARS 252-204-7012. It is a reportable offense. I've told executive management, including multiple members of the executive leadership team, including the COO, CFO, CAO, and CEO about this. The CEO has approved it. They've decided to do it anyway, which puts me in the position of either turning a blind eye and violating my own ethics and legal responsibilities or reporting my own company. Has anyone else experienced this level of disregard for the protection of government data and CMMC? What did you do in that situation? Bonus points to anybody who can find the core flaw in this person's issue here.
So, I mean, I've got a few just initial comments here. Bad idea, terrible idea, not alone from the CUI perspective. If you're using a BYOD device, and there is a case to be made, BYOD could access a controlled VDI environment as an out-of-scope asset. That is a possibility. But if you're not allowing that, and you're actually just saying, take your personal device with you, put CUI on it, right? And then take it with you to Europe, that's a problem. That's a complete and utter failure of the organization. Let alone if that CUI is also export control data. Even if you're taking it to a friendly country and do not have an export control license, you got a problem. Because how are you making sure that that data is not sent or shown in an unencrypted format to a non-US person? I mean, there's I'm assuming they have policies maybe to help that, but still, don't do it. This is a terrible idea. Like, force the person to use VDI, buy the guy a corporate laptop to take with them. Like, do something to help this case, because this is a problem. Jacob, that That's what I feel like. So I don't know if you have comment.
Yeah, I mean, basically the comment thread goes along where they're like, does the CUI have any foreign person access restrictions? Right. And they're like, being somewhere, having access to it is conditioned on the type and restrictions for that particular type of CUI. CUI in general as a category doesn't have those specific restrictions out of the box. So you might not be in that situation, which I like the level of concern and being cautious for sure. Ultimately here, let's say that it was some sort of an issue and it absolutely was a giant red flag violation. This person has kind of covered the bases where they've like, I've noted it, I've explained it, I've run it all the way up the flagpole. I have documented decisions from people above me who have said, we're doing this. And so at that point, your hands are basically tied, and then you can do whatever you want to do with that information as you may see fit. But you're not the one holding the secret. When we were in the Navy, we always had this saying where you're like, you never want to be the last person with a secret. You always want to run it up the chain of command, because if they find out that something went wrong and you were the last person to know about it, even if you didn't do it, it's your problem. And so they're doing what you should do. And yeah, it doesn't seem like, although it definitely would make somebody nervous, doesn't seem like there's an outright issue here. But even if there were, you've CYA'd accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, here to your point, Jacob, basic CUI you can have internationally, right? You don't have to have export licenses or anything like that, assuming it's authorized. The problem is if it's basic CUI, it's the device that's being authorized to hold it, or in this case, unable to be authorized because it doesn't have all the correct CUI asset overlays on top of it with the controls. This, God bless you, whoever you are. I wish you the best. To Daniel's point here in the comments, it should go on the risk register, and the CEO should have documented proof that he approved it. CYA yourself the best that you can.
Yeah, absolutely. The comment thread's really good. You guys should check the thread out. There's a lot of people in there. Their first questions are about ITAR, so definitely dive in. It's a good discussion for sure. I'm sure there's lots of people who are in that situation.
Well, one other small note before we get to the next question. I see a lot of action in the chat about FIPS 140-3.
Mm-hmm.
I had this exact question. I asked Matt at Align, who's a C3 PAO, the same thing. And their practice has been to assess and assume if it's FIPS 140-3 validated, that they are actually accepting that in lieu of -2 because of the deprecation of -2. So it's actually hard to get some of those systems now that only support -2 or that do support -2 at all. You are right. Absolutely, Daniel. The standard is -2, NIST standard 171 hard-coded -2 in it. But I have seen assessors, and I have a podcast under that CMMC show here on our channel that he speaks to that. And they have been approving 140-3 validated cryptography on those same systems.
Yeah, there's an awesome discussion in here about 140-2/140-3. Something I need to brush up on for sure until I get a decision. But I'm glad we have that info from Matt. All righty.
But other assessors could have varying opinions on that. So that is not a one assessor fits all.
Yeah, that's one that we'll have to look into before the next show for sure. Is CMMC 1.0 going away? CMMC 1.0 has gone away. For all intents and purposes, there is no such thing as CMMC 1.0 or CMMC 2.0. We still refer to them whenever we're sort of giving the context around the overall CMMC story, sort of like the upcoming changes to 32 CFR 170 that will require CMMC to verify the implementation of NIST SP 800-171 revision 3. What should we call that? What should we call the update to CMMC? It is the most convenient thing I can think of is to call it CMMC 3.0, because they started with 1.0, we had 2.0, that would be the third version. Although the DoD doesn't refer to them as 1.0 and 2.0 anymore. CMMC is just CMMC. So yeah, 1.0, 5 levels, the Delta 20, all that stuff. What was it? Processes and practices and the naming convention, all that stuff that has gone away. It's only there for historical reference and trivia. And CMMC as we know it now is what they originally referred to as 2.0, but it's just CMMC if you're, depending on which person you're getting your information from. Official DoD people are not supposed to refer to them as 1.0 or 2.0. All righty. Companies that CMMC level 2 self-assess should have. Oh, this was our very own Jacob Hill's very interesting LinkedIn poll that he posted today. Companies that CMMC level 2 self-assess should have a CMMC certified assessor on staff to perform the self-assessment. Agree? Disagree? The options on the poll were have a CCA, a CCP is fine, a registered practitioner is fine, or banana. What do you guys think in chat? For somebody that's self-assessing their company, should they have to have a CCA on staff? Is that the only way that you'd be able to have a meaningful CMMC level 2 self-assessment? What do you think, Daniel? What do you think, chat? Let us know. Do you need any of these things at all in order to go through a self-assessment successfully?
You don't technically need any of it. Pull out the DoD assessment methodology, start working through it, and just show that you can actually produce the artifacts for that. Right now, honestly, we see a lot of ISO quality managers kind of falling into like this territory, right? If they don't have a CCP or a CCA on staff. Now, to Daniel's point, it'd be great if they did. You should, if you can afford it and find one. They're very expensive these days. Little FYI there. But yeah, you do not have to have that. It's a good peace of mind, and it limits, in my opinion, your exposure and risk of doing it wrong, which has larger ramifications, as we've talked about with false claims. But yeah, you don't technically need one.
Yeah, my opinion is that you don't need any of those certifications on your staff in order to meaningfully do it if your existing staff can read well enough. If you can spend the time and the resources to understand how 171 and 171A work, how the CMMC scoping guidance works, all that information is public. There isn't some secret kung fu that gets revealed to you by going through CCP or CCA training or anything like that. So you don't need those things. However, as we know, most people don't spend the time doing that. And so if you're curious, like, should I send people through this training in order to know what's going on? It's probably a safe bet. Training's fine. You know, nothing wrong with it. Is it absolutely necessary? Like, you only know the secret Rex Kwon Do, you know, roundhouse kick with American flag pants on if you go through training? That's not true. But the training does facilitate your understanding a lot better. What does chat say? None are required.
It's expensive. Jason's a lead CCA working inside of an organization. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody got the Napoleon Dynamite reference. You break the wrist, you walk away. Yeah, I don't think it's necessary, but check out Jacob Hill's post. It's an interesting poll. There's lots of interesting comments on it to see what's going on. We go from there. Okay. How many companies have started phase 1 only to determine they are not ready? How many false starts have there been? Pop quiz, everybody. How many false starts have there been?
We don't know.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows because of the AB and the DoD, CMMC, PMO. How many acronyms can I think of in one sentence?
You're doing a good job.
No one tracks this metric. We think that they should. The false start refers to you have signed up for an assessment. You start phase 1 of a CMMC assessment, and you don't qualify to move into the actual formal assessment itself because you haven't demonstrated sufficient readiness. So you don't fail your assessment. You just don't get assessed at all. We call that a false start. Nobody knows how many companies that has happened to. I think they should track it because it would be very illuminating for the ecosystem to say 80% of companies who sign up for their assessment don't qualify to go through an assessment. So make sure that you are as ready as you think you are. You know, that's not to say that it's hard to go through an assessment. Like we've talked about, it's extremely possible. It's totally doable. We now have 40 clients of all shapes and sizes that have gone through this. There's been, by the math, since the effective date of the 32 CFR rule, I think one company every day for the last 7.5 months has achieved a CMMC level 2 certification of all sizes. It's just that people overestimate their readiness. And that isn't just based off the numbers. We did a podcast, I think last year, MXD, who works with the primes, that they were kind of the ones that helped Boeing put out their most recent memo. They did a whole report that said their main takeaway talking to defense companies was that they overestimate their readiness for cybersecurity compliance in CMMC by a ton. And we're seeing that play out in the numbers here.
I had a conversation with an assessor 2 months ago, and they were telling me about one of these false starts. And they're like, the company signed a contract with us. We were, calling them up saying, hey, give us your documentation, for phase one. And they said, oh, just come on site. We can just explain everything to you. And they were like, what do you mean? Like, you got to give us your SSP. They're like, no, our IT guys know enough. Like, just come and interview them. It's like, that's not how this works. Like, for anyone here in the chat or anyone watching, go download a copy of the CAP, which is literally the playbook of what you will be assessed by. So take that plus this 80171A, Rev 2, and FedRAMP, the trifecta here, and then go into a room and kind of figure out, am I actually ready to sign up for this? The CAP is a freely available document on the DoD CIO's website, on the Cyber AB's website. They're not hiding it from anybody. Very few people read it before signing a $40, $50, $60, $70, $80,000 contract for an assessment, which is not good on them. So
yeah, absolutely. All right. Shouldn't we have a specific date that phase one will begin? Doesn't everyone have a year to get ready? If not, won't the rollout be a complete shit show? We've had 300 assessments. Now we need 80,000. Okay. Shouldn't we have a specific date that phase one will begin? We will have a specific date that phase one will begin when the 48 CFR final rule is published. We expect that we will see that publication and beginning of phase one in Q4 of this year, probably no earlier than late October, no later than early February, based off historical data for DoD rulemaking. There are rumors and there are reasons to believe that it could be earlier in October, but the conservative cone of uncertainty is late October to February, almost certainly in Q4. That's when it will begin. Doesn't everyone have a year to get ready from that point? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Typically what this question is based on is saying, oh, I have a year to get ready until I have a certification assessment. I can self-assess until then. Just a reminder, self-assessment is not an intermediary. You are attesting to the government. You have fully implemented everything per your self-assessment, not we're on our way to implementation, just to be clear. And there is no guarantee that you will be able to self-assess for that first year, that phase one of the rollout, because of the things we talked about earlier, DoD's guidance to the contract workforce and the discretion available to the contract workforce kind of puts them in a corner. And so you can't bet on getting a self-assessment in that first year unless your customer has explicitly told you and you know for sure you are getting a self-assessment. If not, third part of the question here, and the rollout starts and everybody needs an assessment, won't it be a complete shit show? We've only had 3 assessments. Now we need 80K. Okay. The DoD estimates that they need 80,000 companies to achieve CMMC level 2. They do not estimate that they need 80,000 companies in the first year, right? Requiring CMMC level 2 certifications in the first year will affect the companies on those contracts, not all 80,000 companies at once. And so you need a lot of assessors and a lot of assessment capacity in order to meet 80,000 assessments over the course of multiple years. Obviously, we need more than we have right now. Technically, according to the DoD's estimate in the final rule from December, they were only planning on having like 517 level 2 certification assessments in the first year. And we're already at almost 300. And I can't remember how many they said. There was like another 89 pending, and there's like 500 C3PAO applications, and there's hundreds and hundreds of assessors, and the demand will only increase once the rule comes out, which means that you're going to have more people going through training. So assessment capacity will expand. I don't think the shit show is going to be on the assessment capacity side. I think it's going to be like you and I have seen, Daniel, on the calls that we are on every week, where people go, oh my God, we need CMMC in 30 days. Otherwise, we can't take award of this contract. And that's going to be the problem. And technically, that's not a CMMC problem. That's not a rollout problem. That's your problem because of the fact that a lot of people just weren't getting ready.
Yep.
All righty.
Before we wrap up, Joseph Miller and I got to have coffee this morning. So if you're in the Huntsville area, and want to hang out, if you're a CUI live streamer, shoot me a LinkedIn message. We'll have to hang out. So.
Absolutely. I'm going to be in Huntsville like 75,000 times between now and the end of the year. So we can definitely hang out with everybody.
Yeah.
Alrighty, let's see here. Okay, maybe last question and then we'll break. I know we didn't get to chat very much this week. I will look through the chat and then we will queue those up later on. Is company email on managed personal devices a realistic option? What if we're using a good MDM that will strip off company apps and data when needed?
Yes. So we know people that have used BYOD devices with MDM and mobile application management policies on those devices that are isolating, containerizing those applications, and basically is out of scope, right? In the sense of they have all the CUI data. My apologies, not out of scope, but they have all the CUI data. So you can't copy and paste from it. Same kind of like the VDI rules, right? And they can have BYOD, and they can have the corporate apps on it and still pass CMMC. You can do selective wipes on that as well. We're slowly pivoting to a little bit more of a robust out-of-scope model for the device as a whole with something called Hypori. Hypori is a full VDI, or they call it VMI, virtual mobile infrastructure, which streams you a compliant Android OS to your device, iOS or Android. And then all of the CUI stuff stays behind this stream, just like a Windows VDI would. So pretty cool technology. If you're interested in that, feel free to reach out. But yes, you can use BYOD with corporately managed apps as long as the mobile phone itself still has to be managed and those apps have to be managed.
Awesome. Okay, that was the end of the hour. I am afraid to refresh the news and see what other crazy stuff has happened in the ecosystem since we started talking. We do this Q&A stream every Friday. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us on YouTube. If you find this afterwards, leave a comment, and then we'll try to work it in as best as we can. You go to CUIHotline.org, fill out the form and leave a question. You call the number and leave a question. Our DMs are open. We got tons of stuff in the queue, tons of stuff just from chat today that we didn't get to. We've got some rabbit hole scoping questions that have been in the queue for a while that we need to get to. We promise we will get to them as we can. Coming up in the end of this month. It's already August. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Coming up at the end of this month, Summit 7 Labs free webinar. It's free. It doesn't cost any money. Everybody was asking, what's the DoD doing to help out contractors? Not really a whole lot, but we sure are. So check this out. We're going to be talking stuff, talking tradecraft, talking strategies, talking success stories, all that stuff. Going to be a good time. Let's see. It's August. Hall of Fame game was last night. So if you haven't gotten on the Chargers bandwagon yet, you better do that because space is running out fast. The trade deadline in baseball was yesterday. San Diego's AJ Preller went absolutely crazy, sold the farm. We have no prospects left. They went all in trying to win this year. And tonight I'll be at the game with the new lineup of brand new players. Look for me stressing because we just want to win one, please, before I die. And that's it, everybody. We'll see you next week. And yeah, thanks for stopping by.
See y'all.